everyone. It's Mike Levitt. Friday, June 7th, 2019 at about 8 p.m. and I'm heading to pick up my daughter. And I thought I'd shoot a video. It's almost hard to believe that I used to shoot these things nearly every day. Whether I posted them or not was hit or miss, because I don't edit. If I'm happy with it, I post. And I was watching YouTube today and noticing how these Python tutorial series that are highly produced productions that date back like 4 or 5 years ago. I can hardly believe it. To about the time when I started thinking, about halfway into my Python education so far. I'm about 10 years into it. But about 5 years in, it occurred to me that there was going to be a tremendous hunger for Python as it crossed over with Java as probably the world's most popular generic systems language. And I say generic systems language because, of course, with the proliferation of highly JavaScript capable web browsers and the standardization of JavaScript and the heavy front-end development done in JavaScript for that reason, coupled with the full web stack of Node.js allowing those front-end developers to dabble in back-end stuff, particularly with a sort of naturally concurrent first behavior that's suitable for a lot of web scalable applications. So it's inevitable that JavaScript is going to be like the current pea in the pool of tech. There's always one out there. And so JavaScript becomes important just like PostScript was important in their day. One of the largest revenue sources for Adobe was the licensing on the PostScript embedded into PostScript printers. Everything that supported PostScript had to pay Adobe their licensing fee. And today we all pay Adobe in that either $10 a month or $600 a year fee for Photoshop or the full Creative Studio suite or whatever they're calling it. If you're using the proprietary high-end best of breed graphics production tools. Not all of us are. So anyway, I'm diverging a little here. I back up a little bit. We're talking about how JavaScript has become like the modern PostScript. It's got to be used. It's the way stuff is done these days, and it has everything to do with user I/O, interface development work, due to its things not having to wait for other things to occur, because you never know when a user is going to press somewhere on the screen. But nonetheless, this is what I would call a specialized development skill. It is not mainstream generic systems programming, because its concerns are significantly different than general programming concerns. And you see that expressed all the time in the framework du jour for the JavaScript world. Angular, React, the Twitter, was it Boot? I forget their names. Bootstrap. Anyway, there's a JavaScript framework library du jour, and you end up being specialized in that framework or that library as opposed to basic JavaScript itself, because no one wants to do that, because then you're right back where you were like in the early C days, where everyone has to build up libraries anyway. So if someone's going to build up a library, you might as well let it be Facebook and Google and you ride their coattails. So that's what the JavaScript scene is today. Now, to be fair, there's a significant amount of that in the Python world, because for Python to be fully useful these days, you have to add the ever popular requests library and the pandas library, so that you can do internet interactivity pretty easily, hit APIs and do web scraping. or do database stuff respectively. Requests is for HTTP web work, and pandas is for SQL-like database work. So you got to add those two things to Python. But then you're doing database type stuff and generic web interaction stuff, and in other words, system programming in a language and an environment just much more comfortable and suitable for casual, off-the-cuff programming. This is why, even though this is all very grown-up formal languages these days, we still often refer to them as scripting languages, because it implies a sort of relaxed attitude that you bring to the work. You don't have to check off 100 check marks before you do a make include, that like in the C world. You just fire up your text editor, start writing a file, and then you can just run it immediately and see if it works. And if it doesn't, you change it a little. Now, there used to be this huge divide between the compiled language world and the interpreter language world. And spiritually, there still is this divide, but functionally, it's pretty much gone because of just-in-time compiling and various internal optimizations that the interpreted world has made to make it work a lot more like compiled languages. They almost all do it now, Python especially so. So stuff executes like compiled C code, in many cases as fast as the equivalent native C would be, but not in all cases. There are certain things where you can just use much more efficient techniques if you code it in C++, I guess, directly, and make it a module of Python. And that's what occurs in pandas and various other Python libraries that have internal optimizations for that particular hardware, usually x86, more and more ARM these days. But Python is really just that. It's supported. It's in the critical path of everything these days. And we talked about the P in the pool of tech and how JavaScript especially is. Well, Python also is now too, replacing in the hearts and minds of many pragmatic programmers, and there's that word pragmatic. Python people are pragmatic. They try and hit the fat, big top of the normal distribution curve of the type of work you can accomplish simply. It's a generic programming language that's mostly sequential in nature and mostly procedural in nature. So that means you write functions, and those functions get called in the order that you call them, one at a time, with a very predictable script that is the playing out of how it's going to run. Which is not to say you can't do the other flavors of programming, one of which is concurrent. There is an async IO library in Python now that lets it do all the things that all the other libraries like Twisted and Tornado, it's funny words, but there's always a way in Python, because there's always someone willing to come in and write it in C and just make it work, and then just make it a library to Python. And another popular trick is to wrap things like Hadoop, the MapReduce distributed software, and a whole bunch of other stuff that's often written in either compiled C or in Java a lot of times, and they write Python wrappers to it, so you can address those just as if they were native Python libraries as well, although whether the API is Pythonic or not is always a question. So anyway, I'm going to try and nail down the point. I know I tend to ramble. I have a lot on my mind, but one of the great things on my mind is how little people are talking about the choice of Python in the first place. It seems like one of the many choices in the soupy mix of technologies that you have the choice of taking up. And what I'm here to tell you is no, Python is becoming, has already become, arguably is now today, the new lingua franca, the new language of tech, primary lead language of tech, the one you would learn your computer science principles on, the legendary MIT program for computer science has switched. They were the progenitors, the creators of Lisp, which arguably is a better language than Python for reasons we will not get into today. It has not taken the lead, but its spirit lives on in many things. And basically, Lisp proclaims that, all languages can be expressed as a subset of Lisp, which is greatly true. You might say the same thing about C, but no, C actually has a lot of stuff it's done for the particular processors in mind. It's not quite as abstract. And for the compiler, it's not quite as abstract as Lisp is. One of the exercises in Lisp is often to write your own compiler for your own program. So anyway, Python you can almost think of as one of the languages you would create with Lisp. It's a sub-language. It is a subset of the super language, call it Lisp, that can produce all other languages. So Python is just one of the many, many subset languages in the world, but it just happens to hit the sweet spot of needs and ease of use better than all other things that have preceded it because of a rich history, which is very researchable on the web. Guido van Rossum, the creator of Python, readily admits that it's really the principles of the ABC programming language that he put into effect in a language that caters to or plays to the needs and desires of both the sysadmin crowd, the people who are writing scripts in Perl before writing installer scripts and deployment routines in the Perl programming language, which has a lot of things wrong with it. I mean, it's a beautiful language in how many ways you can do a single thing, but computer science-wise, it's got a lot to be desired. Although people make the opposite arguments. It's got different problem concerns it's addressing, those of the cunning linguist Larry Wall. There's a Freudian slip. Could have been a Larry Page in a bizarro different world. But, you listen to Larry Wall talk someday and you go, oh, I get Perl. But anyway, it was special because it was first and it was everywhere, and everything in Linux, Unix world wrote everything in Perl. People just don't do that so much anymore, and they have to take up something, and it just tends to be Python to fill that position right now. It's worth learning. There's no problem in the job market, and it lets you tackle most things you will encounter. It gives you a first way to try and do things, and likely 10 people have tried to do the exact same thing before, and 2 of them wrote libraries, and they now compete with each other. So I would talk about the requests library like it's unique. It is far from unique. There are many things that alter or simplify the way you do HTTP functions in Python. It's pretty difficult natively. Dealing with bad drivers. Okay. So, where was I? So Python is the pea in the pool of tech for doing most of the things that you'll encounter most easily. As popular as JavaScript may be, I think what you'll encounter is that people will tell you it's not easy to just write things in JavaScript. It's not a joyous, pleasurable experience. The reward is in having a language that can deploy to billions of players that are ready to just play it. Mobile devices, mobile web browsers, and to have the most personal and meaningful of interactions, those with the user, the I/O with the user through web pages, and increasingly so native feeling type apps. So it's a good web development language, but it is not a good generic development language. So when you want to have a sane approach to tech and not be overwhelmed with all the choices that are out there, Python's going to be part of your solution. And I advocate really a small tool set: Linux, Python, Vim, and Git. And Linux only so to have a place to run your Python code, to have a generic default place you can always set up and have it under your control without too many licensing issues, so that you can just create your own automations. That's controlling a robot one day if you want to. You need to be able to have a place to run your code and be able to write it. So that's Linux and Python. Vim is the text editor, which, as I say very often, it is the most controversial of what I advocate. It's also some of the greatest rewards, because you get that sort of telepathically in tune with text on this monitor sort of feeling that is expressed in so many movies when you see the hacker just moving things around like they control it by thought. That's more or less Vim. There's also Emacs, but those are the great text wars, which after so many years and so many other user interface options available with computers, point and click and touchscreens, it's still the text wars, Vim versus Emacs, and I side on Vim because it plays like a video game and allows you to do muscle memory stuff most easily. And Git, because you got to make your code safe, and you got to share it, and you got to collaborate, and you got to get it around, and you got to have a bare minimum deployment strategy to get your code in more places than just on the machine you developed it. So that's it. I'm at my destination, and I'm going to be finding my parking pretty soon here, but I ought to wrap it up in saying, if you're new to tech, or you're deciding what to take up so that you have the minimal fear of obsolescence and necessity to be on the rat race retraining on the next popular library du jour, you want to take yourself up some Linux, Python, Vim, and Git, with an emphasis in Python on the two tools that you add to it: the request object to make, or the request package to make basic web scraping and HTTP function calls and API interaction work real easy, and Pandas, which lets you do a lot of database type stuff that you would normally need full-fledged SQL and a lot more tech overhead. And these two skills will get you work and give you superpowers and be professionally satisfying if you're anything like me. And in the Walrus and the Carpenter story, you will be, using the best tools for the carpenter to do the most type of work, and to always assure yourself, the pride and satisfaction of a craftsman and a pretty good job market. Good work out there for people who can connect to systems, do some processing, and output it different ways and push it into different systems in turn. So I'm Mike Levin, or Mike Levin, as we say in Philadelphia, even though I'm a New Yorker now, after, pushing 15 years, maybe somewhere in there. And this is my video series on YouTube, and I'm a straight talking guy, and I just say what's on my mind, and I don't edit. So thank you for bearing with me, for the people who actually get to the end of these videos. And after watching a few of those highly polished, highly produced things today, I'm glad I'm going my route, because it's not about a thing becoming for its own sake. It is a tool so that you can use the tool, commit its mastery and expertise internally as if it's a part of your body, and use all your excess capacity, because now you don't have to think about it anymore, to be creative and to do other things that actually take the hard-working, calorie-burning cycles of your brain, so you don't have to always be thinking about where to put your semicolons and where parentheses go around conditions and all this other stuff that gets stripped out as completely unnecessary overhead, which times millions of lines of code over your lifetime is really going to wear you out and create a lot of fatigue. So Python, Linux, Python, Vim, and Git, and a shout out to Jupyter Notebook. Thanks for joining me. Hope to see you again soon. Don't forget to subscribe.